Imagine waking up one day to find out that everything you thought you knew about your life was a lie. That the parents who raised you weren't your real parents, and the life you've been living was just a shadow of the destiny you were meant to fulfill. This is the story of Emily Carter, a young woman who grew up in the shadows of an orphanage, never knowing where she came from or why she was left behind. But what if I told you that Emily's story is about to take a turn so dramatic, so unbelievable, that it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about fate, family, and fortune? What if I told you that Emily is about to discover that she's not just an ordinary girl, but the daughter of one of the most powerful business tycoons in the world? And what if I told you that this revelation will come with a price, one that could change her life forever? From the very first moment we meet Emily, it's clear that she's not like everyone else. There's a quiet strength in her eyes, a resilience that comes from years of surviving on her own. She spent her entire life in the confines of St. Mary's Orphanage, a place that's become both her prison and her sanctuary. The other kids tease her, calling her the girl with no past, but Emily has always held on to the hope that one day she'll find out the truth about who she really is. Little does she know that truth is closer than she thinks, and it's about to shatter her world in ways she could never have imagined. The story begins on a cold, rainy night, the kind of night that feels like it's straight out of a mystery novel. Emily is working late at a small cafe trying to make ends meet when a mysterious stranger walks in. He's dressed in an expensive suit, his eyes sharp and calculating, and he seems to be looking for someone. When his gaze lands on Emily, there's a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a look that sends a shiver down her spine. Before she can say a word, he hands her an envelope and disappears into the night. Inside the envelope is a single piece of paper with a name written on it, Alexander Blackwood. The name means nothing to Emily, but something about it feels important. It's as if the universe is trying to tell her something, but she can't quite put her finger on what it is. As Emily begins to dig deeper into the mystery of Alexander Blackwood, she uncovers a web of secrets, lies, and betrayals that stretches back decades. She learns that Blackwood is not just any businessman, he's a billionaire tycoon, a man who controls empires and moves in circles so exclusive that most people can only dream of them. But what does he have to do with her? Why did that stranger give her his name? And why does she feel this strange connection to a man she's never even met? The more Emily uncovers, the more questions she has, and the more dangerous the game becomes. Because in the world of Alexander Blackwood, nothing is as it seems, and trust is a luxury that no one can afford. But Emily isn't alone in this journey. Along the way, she meets a cast of characters who will either help her or hinder her, sometimes both. There's Daniel, the charming but enigmatic journalist who seems to know more about her past than he's letting on. There's Sophia, the elegant and ruthless businesswoman who has her own reasons for wanting to keep Emily in the dark. And then there's Marcus, the loyal friend who's been by Emily's side since their days at the orphanage and who may hold the key to unlocking the truth. Each of these characters has their own agenda, their own secrets, and their own role to play in the unfolding drama. But as Emily gets closer to the truth, she begins to realize that not everyone is who they seem and that some secrets are better left buried now. I know what you're thinking. You're probably wondering how all of this ties together. How does a simple orphan girl end up at the center of a high-stakes game of power, wealth, and deception? And more importantly, what does this mean for Emily? Is she destined to take her place as the heir to the Blackwood Empire, or is she just a pawn in someone else's game? These are the questions that will keep you on the edge of your seat, the questions that will make you click that play button and keep watching until the very end. Because here's the thing, this isn't just a story about a girl finding out she's rich. This is a story about identity, about the choices we make and the secrets we keep. It's about the lengths people will go to for power, and the price they're willing to pay to keep it. And most importantly, it's about what happens when the truth finally comes out and whether Emily will be able to handle it. If you're ready to dive into a world of mystery, intrigue, and heart-pounding drama, then you're in the right place. This is the story of Emily Carter, the orphan girl who discovered she was the daughter of a business tycoon. But be warned, once you start watching, you won't be able to stop. Because this isn't just a story, it's an experience. And by the end of it, you'll be left with one burning question. What would you do if you found out your entire life was a lie? Stick around because the answers are coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. But before we go any further, let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like you were meant for something more? Like there was a part of your life that was missing? A piece of the puzzle that just didn't fit? If so, then you're going to relate to Emily on a level that's almost too real. Because her journey isn't just about discovering her past, it's about finding herself. And as we follow her through the twists and turns of this incredible story, you're going to see a little bit of yourself in her. You're going to feel her pain, her hope, her fear, and her determination. And by the time we reach the end, you're going to be just as invested in her story as she is. So, what are you waiting for? The mystery is about to unfold, and you're about to get the answers you've been searching for. But remember, nothing in this story is as it seems. Every clue, every revelation, every twist is leading us closer to the truth, but it's also leading us closer to danger. And as Emily gets closer to uncovering the secrets of her past, she's also getting closer to a truth that could change everything. So, are you ready to take the journey with her? Are you ready to find out what really happened to Emily Carter? Then let's dive in because the truth is waiting, and it's more shocking than you could ever imagine. But be careful, because once you know the truth, there's no going back. As Emily stared at the name Alexander Blackwood scrawled on that mysterious piece of paper, her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. Who was he? Why had that stranger given her his name? And why did it feel like the first thread of a tapestry she was meant to unravel? The cafe around her buzzed with the usual hum of late-night customers, but to Emily, the world had suddenly gone silent. It was as if that single moment had split her life into two distinct halves, the before and the after. She didn't know it yet, but that envelope was the key to a door she had been knocking on her entire life, a door that would lead her to a past she never knew existed and a future she could never have imagined. Emily's life at St. Mary's Orphanage had always been one of quiet resilience. She had learned early on that the world wasn't kind to those without a family, and she had built walls around herself to keep the pain at bay. But deep down, there was a part of her that never stopped wondering where she came from. The other kids at the orphanage had stories, some true, some embellished, about their parents, their lives before St. Mary's, and why they ended up there. But Emily had nothing. No memories, no mementos, not even a last name. All she had was a first name, given to her by the nuns who found her on the orphanage steps as a baby, wrapped in a blanket with no note, no explanation, no trace of where she had come from. That blank slate had haunted her for as long as she could remember, and now, for the first time, it felt like she might finally get some answers. The days following the stranger's visit were a blur. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the name Alexander Blackwood. She tried to push it out of her mind, to focus on her work and her life, but it was like a splinter she couldn't remove. It nagged at her, demanding her attention. Finally, she decided to do what she had always done when faced with a problem. She would research it. With the help of Marcus, her best friend from the orphanage who had always been her rock, Emily began to dig into the life of Alexander Blackwood. What she found was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Blackwood wasn't just a businessman, he was a titan of industry, a man whose name was synonymous with power, wealth, and influence. His empire spanned continents, and his reach extended into politics, media, and even philanthropy. He was a man who seemed to have it all except, as Emily would soon discover, the one thing he had lost long ago. As Emily delved deeper into Blackwood's world, she began to uncover fragments of a story that seemed too incredible to be true. There were whispers of a scandal from decades ago, a story that had been buried so deep that only the most determined investigators could find it. It involved a young woman, a love affair, and a child who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The details were murky, but one thing was clear: Alexander Blackwood had a past that he had gone to great lengths to keep hidden. And as Emily pieced together the clues, she began to suspect that she might be the missing piece of that puzzle. But if that was true, why had she been left at an orphanage? Why had Blackwood never come looking for her? And what had happened to her mother? Meanwhile, Emily's life began to take on a surreal quality. Strange. Things started happening, things she couldn't explain. She would catch glimpses of the same mysterious stranger who had given her the envelope, always watching her from a distance. Her apartment was broken into, but nothing was stolen. It was as if someone had been searching for something. And then there were the dreams. Vivid, haunting dreams of a woman with kind eyes and a soft voice, calling out to her, telling her to be careful. Emily didn't know if the dreams were memories or just her subconscious trying to make sense of everything, but they left her feeling unsettled, as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice, about to fall into something she couldn't control. It was around this time that Daniel, the journalist, entered her life. He claimed to be working on a story about Alexander Blackwood and had heard that Emily might have information that could help him. At first, Emily was wary. She didn't trust easily, and Daniel's charm and confidence only made her more suspicious. But as they spent more time together, she began to see a different side of him, a side that was just as curious and determined as she was. Daniel had his own reasons for wanting to expose Blackwood's secrets, and as they worked together, Emily found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected. But she couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something, that there was more to his story than he was letting on. And as the stakes grew higher, Emily began to wonder if she could really trust him, or if he was just another player in the game. Then there was Sophia Blackwood, Alexander's estranged daughter and the heir apparent to his empire. Sophia was everything Emily wasn't: polished, powerful, and ruthless. She had grown up in the lap of luxury, but it was clear that her relationship with her father was complicated, to say the least. When Sophia learned of Emily's existence, she saw her as a threat, a potential rival for her father's attention, and, more importantly, his fortune. Sophia's attempts to undermine Emily were subtle at first, but as Emily got closer to the truth, they became more overt, more dangerous. It was a battle of wits and wills, and Emily knew that if she wasn't careful, she could lose everything. As the pieces of the puzzle began to come together, Emily found herself caught in a web of intrigue that stretched far beyond her own story. There were other players in the game, people with their own agendas, their own secrets, and their own reasons for wanting to keep the truth buried. Some wanted to protect Alexander Blackwood, while others wanted to destroy him. And then there were those who saw Emily as a pawn, a means to an end. But Emily was no pawn. She had spent her entire life fighting for herself, and she wasn't about to stop now. She was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. But the deeper she went, the more she realized that the truth was more complicated and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. There were forces at work that she couldn't see, alliances that shifted like sand, and betrayals that cut deeper than she could have anticipated. And as she got closer to Alexander Blackwood, she began to see glimpses of the man behind the legend, a man who was as flawed and human as anyone else, but who carried the weight of his choices like a burden he could never put down. Emily didn't know if she could forgive him for what he had done, but she couldn't deny the connection she felt to him, the pull of a bond that had been broken long before she was born. And then, just when she thought she was close to finding the answer she had been searching for, everything changed. A new piece of evidence emerged, one that turned everything she thought she knew on its head. It was a revelation so shocking, so unexpected, that it left her reeling. Suddenly, the questions she had been asking seemed trivial compared to the ones she now faced. Who could she trust? What was real? And what would she do when she finally came face to face with the man who might be her father? The answers were out there, waiting for her, but they came with a price, one that Emily wasn't sure she was ready to pay. So, as we leave Emily on the edge of this precipice, teetering between the life she's always known and the one she's about to step into, one thing is clear: this is just the beginning. The road ahead is fraught with danger, deception, and heartbreak, but it's also filled with the promise of discovery, redemption, and perhaps a love that could change everything. The question is, will Emily have the strength to see it through? And more importantly, will you? Because this story isn't just about Emily, it's about all of us. It's about the choices we make, the secrets we keep, and the lengths we'll go to for the truth. So stay tuned because the next chapter is about to begin. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Emily's world was spinning out of control, and the revelation that had just landed in her lap felt like a punch to the gut. The new piece of evidence, a faded photograph tucked inside an old locket, showed a young Alexander Blackwood standing beside a woman who looked eerily like Emily. But it wasn't just the resemblance that shook her to her core. It was the inscription on the back of the photo, "To my beloved daughter, Emily. Always remember, you are more than they say you are." The words were written in a delicate, feminine hand, and they carried a weight that Emily couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a photograph. It was a message from her mother, a woman whose existence had been erased from every record Emily had found. Who was she? Why had she disappeared? And why had she left this locket behind, hidden away where no one could find it until now? The discovery of the locket sent Emily down a new path, one that was even darker and more treacherous than she had anticipated. She began to piece together fragments of her mother's story, a tale of love, betrayal, and sacrifice that had been buried for decades. Her mother, it seemed, had been more than just a fleeting presence in Alexander Blackwood's life. She had been his greatest love and his greatest mistake. Their relationship had been a secret, hidden from the world and from Blackwood's powerful family, who would never have accepted a woman from outside their elite circle. But when Emily's mother became pregnant, everything changed. Blackwood's family saw her as a threat, a liability that could tarnish their reputation and jeopardize their empire. And so, they had taken matters into their own hands, ensuring that Emily's mother would disappear and that her child would never be found. As Emily uncovered these truths, she felt a mix of emotions she couldn't quite untangle. There was anger, of course, at the injustice of it all. But there was also a deep, aching sadness for the woman who had loved her enough to leave behind a message, even if it had taken years for Emily to find it. And then there was the fear, the gnawing, unrelenting fear that she was walking into a trap. Because if Blackwood's family had gone to such lengths to erase her mother and hide her existence, what would they do to Emily now that she was digging up the past? She had already seen the lengths they were willing to go to keep their secrets buried. The break-in at her apartment, the mysterious stranger who seemed to be watching her every move, the subtle threats from Sophia, it was all part of a game she didn't fully understand, but one she was determined to win. Meanwhile, Daniel's role in all of this was becoming increasingly complicated. He had been her ally, her confidant, the one person she felt she could trust. But as they delved deeper into Blackwood's world, Emily began to notice cracks in his facade. There were moments when he seemed too eager, too invested in the story, as if he had his own reasons for wanting to expose Blackwood's secret. And then there were the late-night phone calls, the cryptic conversations she overheard, the way he would sometimes disappear for hours without explanation. Emily wanted to believe in him, to trust that he was on her side, but the more she learned, the harder it became to ignore the nagging doubt in the back of her mind. Was Daniel really who he said he was? Or was he just another pawn in a game that was much bigger than either of them? Sophia, on the other hand, was becoming more brazen in her attempts to intimidate Emily. What had started as subtle threats and veiled warnings had escalated into outright hostility. She had made it clear that she saw Emily as a threat, not just to her inheritance but to the carefully constructed image of the Blackwood family. And she wasn't alone. There were others in Blackwood's inner circle who saw Emily as a problem that needed to be dealt with quickly and quietly. But Emily wasn't about to back down. She had spent her entire life fighting for herself, and she wasn't about to let anyone take away the chance to finally know the truth about who she was. The tension came to a head one fateful night when Emily received an anonymous message urging her to meet at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The message was cryptic, but it promised answers about her mother, about Blackwood, and about the forces that had conspired to keep them apart. Against her better judgment, Emily went, driven by a desperate need to know the truth. What she found there would change everything. The warehouse was dark and eerily silent, the air thick with the scent of decay. As she stepped inside, she was met by a figure cloaked in shadows, a woman who introduced herself as Margaret, a former employee of the Blackwood family. Margaret had been there the night Emily's mother disappeared, and she had been carrying the weight of that secret ever since. What Margaret revealed was both shocking and heartbreaking. Emily's mother hadn't just been forced to leave, she had been betrayed by someone she trusted, someone who had promised to protect her but had instead handed her over to Blackwood's enemies. That person, Margaret claimed, was none other than Alexander Blackwood himself. He had made a deal with his family to ensure that Emily's mother would never be seen again, and in return, they had agreed to let him keep his empire. It was a betrayal so profound, so devastating, that Emily could barely process it. But Margaret wasn't finished. She also revealed that Emily's mother had left behind something else, a journal, hidden in a safe deposit box that contained the full story of what had happened. If Emily wanted the truth, she would have to find it. As Emily left the warehouse, her mind was racing. She had come looking for answers, but all she had found were more questions. Who could she trust? Was Alexander Blackwood really the villain in this story, or was there more to it than Margaret had revealed? And what was in that journal that was so important, so dangerous that her mother had gone to such lengths to protect it? Emily didn't know, but she was determined to find out. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her mother, about the life they could have had together, and about the forces that had torn them apart. And as she stepped into the night, she knew one thing for certain: the game was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. But just as Emily thought she was getting closer to the truth, the unexpected happened. A figure emerged from the shadows, blocking her path. It was Daniel, his face pale and his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Emily," he said, his voice trembling, "you need to stop. You don't understand what you're getting into. There are things you don't know that could get you killed." Emily stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. What was he talking about? And why did he look so afraid? Before she could ask, Daniel grabbed her arm and pulled her into the shadows, just as a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of the warehouse. The doors flew open and several men in dark suits stepped out, their faces grim and their intentions clear. They were looking for her. In that moment, Emily realized that she was no longer just a girl searching for the truth. She was a threat to the Blackwood family, to their empire, and to the secrets they had spent decades protecting. And if she wasn't careful, she would become just another casualty in their war. But Emily wasn't about to let that happen. She had come too far, fought too hard to back down now. The journal was out there, waiting for her, and she was going to find it no matter what it took. Because the truth wasn't just a luxury anymore. It was a weapon. And Emily was ready to use it. But as she and Daniel disappeared into the night, one question lingered in her mind. What would she do when she finally found it? And more importantly, what would the truth do to her? Emily and Daniel moved through the labyrinth of back alleys, their breaths ragged and their hearts pounding. The men in the black SUV were relentless, their footsteps echoing ominously behind them. Emily's mind raced as she clutched the locket tightly in her hand, the weight of her mother's words pressing heavily on her chest. "You are more than they say you are." Those words had become her mantra, her lifeline in the chaos that had consumed her life. But as they ducked into a dimly lit subway station, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time. The journal, her mother's journal, was the key to everything, and she had to find it before the Blackwood family could silence her forever. Daniel's revelation about the danger she was in only added to the storm raging inside her. He had warned her to stop, to walk away before it was too late, but Emily knew she couldn't. She had come too far, uncovered too much, to turn back now. And yet, as she looked at Daniel, his face pale, his hands trembling, she couldn't help but wonder if he was hiding something. There was a flicker of guilt in his eyes, a hesitation in his voice that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. Was he truly on her side? Or was he just another pawn in the Blackwood family's game? The thought sent a chill down her spine, but she pushed it aside. She didn't have the luxury of doubt, not now. The safe deposit box was located in a small, nondescript bank on the edge of the city. Emily had found the key hidden inside the locket, a final gift from her mother that had gone unnoticed until now. As she and Daniel approached the bank, the tension between them was palpable. They hadn't spoken since their narrow escape, and the silence was heavy with unspoken questions. But there was no time to address them. The bank was closing soon, and they had to act fast. With a deep breath, Emily stepped inside, her heart pounding as she handed the key to the teller. The woman's eyes widened slightly as she examined it, but she said nothing, simply leading Emily to a private room where the box was kept. The moment Emily opened the box, she felt as if the world had stopped. Inside was a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age but still intact. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, the weight of it both physical and emotional. This was it, the truth she had been searching for, the answers to questions that had haunted her for as long as she could remember. But as she began to read, the words on the page shattered everything she thought she knew. Her mother's story was one of love, yes, but also of betrayal, not just by Alexander Blackwood, but by someone much closer to home. The journal revealed that Emily's mother had been betrayed by her own sister, a woman who had been jealous of her relationship with Blackwood and had conspired with his family to destroy it. It was a revelation so shocking, so devastating that Emily could barely process it. But the journal didn't stop there. It also contained a bombshell that would change everything. Emily wasn't Alexander Blackwood's only child. She had a twin brother, a boy who had been taken from their mother at birth and raised in secret by the Blackwood family. His name was Lucas, and he had been groomed from a young age to take over the family empire. The revelation hit Emily like a tidal wave, leaving her breathless and disoriented. She had spent her entire life feeling alone, but now she knew she had a brother who had been kept from her. A brother who might not even know she existed. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying, and it left her with a million questions. Where was Lucas now? Did he know the truth? And what would happen when they finally met? As Emily absorbed the enormity of what she had just learned, Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts. "Emily, we need to go. They're coming." His words were urgent, his eyes darting toward the door. But Emily couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her mother, her brother, and the life they could have had together. It was about the lies that had been told, the secrets that had been kept, and the truth that had been buried for far too long. And she wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her. The confrontation that followed was inevitable. The men in the black SUV had tracked them down, and they weren't alone. Sophia was with them, her face a mask of cold determination. She had always seen Emily as a threat, but now, with the journal in her hands, Emily was more dangerous than ever. The tension in the room was palpable as Sophia demanded that Emily hand over the journal, her voice dripping with venom. But Emily stood her ground, her eyes blazing with defiance. She had spent her entire life fighting for herself, and she wasn't about to back down now. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "This is about my mother, my brother, and the truth that you've been trying to hide. And I'm not going to let you take that away from me." What happened next was a blur. There was shouting, a struggle, and then the sound of sirens in the distance. The police had been tipped off, and the Blackwood family's carefully constructed fay-aid was beginning to crumble. In the chaos, Emily managed to escape with the journal, but not without a cost. Daniel had been injured, and as she knelt beside him, she saw the truth in his eyes. He had been working for the Blackwood family all along, feeding them information in exchange for money and protection. But in the end, he had chosen to help her, to risk everything for the girl who had trusted him when she had no one else. It was a betrayal and a redemption all at once, and it left Emily with a mix of emotions she couldn't untangle. The fallout from that night was swift and far-reaching. The revelations in the journal sparked a media frenzy, and the Blackwood family's empire began to unravel. Alexander Blackwood was forced to confront the choices he had made, the lives he had destroyed, and the daughter he had abandoned. And Emily? She finally got the answers she had been searching for, but they came with a price. The truth had cost her everything: her trust, her innocence, and the life she had known. But it had also given her something she had never had before: a sense of belonging. She had found her brother, Lucas, and together they began to rebuild the family that had been torn apart by greed and betrayal. In the end, Emily's story wasn't just about a girl who discovered she was the daughter of a business tycoon. It was about the power of truth, the strength of family, and the courage to fight for what's right. It was a reminder that no matter how dark the past may be, there is always hope for a brighter future. And as Emily stood on the steps of the Blackwood mansion, her brother by her side and the journal in her hands, she knew that she had finally